Morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Raj. Very nice. I work for economic development in the city of Johannesburg, and people generally ask me, well, what's technology doing in economic development? And the reason is because Joburg sees broadband as an outcome, not a technology, not a technical application, not a network, but rather pervasive broadband access is an economic outcome. I'm going to take you to a slide which may not make sense initially, but when we present to people in underserviced areas, we always get asked, what is this broadband stuff? One of the ladies that I first presented to said, you know, I don't know anything about broadband. I only know the Alexandra Brass Band. And if so, what band are you representing? What instrument do you play? And why are you talking to us? And so we actually have to, in a lot of cases, explain what this technology is and the transformative potential of the technology. And I say this slide may not make sense now because we all know what broadband is. We all know what it can do from an economic perspective, and we all use it. But that is not the case throughout the spatial landscape, both rurally and urbanly, and from an urban perspective. So what Mark and what Andile and some of the other guys are talking about in terms of technology, that's all high-tech plumbing. You know, it's not about the network anymore. And I think even operators are starting to see that the money's not in the network anymore. The money's in the services and the applications that can be deployed over the network. And so that's really where it is. And what we're seeing also is, if you look at this slide, there are no RJ45 cables, there are no BNC cables, and I'm showing my age here. You know, there are no cables on this slide. So people interact with broadband wirelessly now. And it's become a Wi-Fi world, and we need to recognize that. But in recognizing that, what we also need to recognize is that it's about backhaul capacity and it's about egress capacity. So when Andile talks about the 1 gig at his house, he actually doesn't get that via you know, a backhaul 5 whatever gig connection, 5.4 gig connection. He gets it probably via fiber. So I think we need to recognize that there's a blend of technologies, as I said earlier, that need to be taken into account to deliver broadband as an outcome. From an applications point of view, what are we seeing broadband being able to do from a city perspective, mainly? It's really about, first of all, industrial and economic growth, sustainable society, so that's what we talk about when we talk about affordable broadband. It's about government efficiencies, and so there was a news article that came out a while ago that talked about the fact that the city spends, in 2010 we did an audit, 400 million rand on telecommunication services annually. It's a lot of money. If I could save myself 20–30% of that, that's between 80 and 120 million rand that could go back into the fiscus. And so we take the affordable broadband issue quite seriously, so seriously that in fact we decided to deploy our own broadband network to ensure that we could get high quality services at an affordable price. I'll talk about that a bit later. I think whenever you talk about the economic impact of broadband, you have to use this slide, so it's become the ubiquitous slide that everyone quotes from. It's the 1.38% slide which talks to your broadband penetration increasing economic growth. And there's a couple of points there as to why it does this. There's no hard research, funnily enough, to exactly what the causal factors of that economic growth are, but we do know that we're seeing a correlation. But I think that's old news. And why am I saying that? I mean, if you take the economy of Joburg and you multiply 313 billion rand, because that's what it is, the GVA of Joburg, by 1.38%, you get about 4 billion rand increase over and above the standard economic growth increases that you would see. So that's a fair amount of money. So why is it old news? Well, if you look at the global stats, About a third of the people in the world use broadband internet via typically Wi-Fi or mobile broadband. Broadband impacts, from an economic perspective, 3.4% in developed economies. So that's the impact on economic growth, accelerated economic growth, in developed economies of broadband. For every single job that's lost, and people do tend to demonize the internet and broadband as jobless growth, but it actually isn't. It creates 2.6 jobs for every single job lost. We're seeing jobs in very new industries, jobs that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago, have become de rigueur. I was talking to the chief storyteller at IBM the other day. I never knew there was a chief storyteller. But there actually is. That's a job that's come across because people actually need to collate their data and to send that data out to people and to make sense of it. What's the new news? The new news is the two figures at the top. And particularly from a target perspective, the figure that Sweden's achieved. 6.3% of Sweden's GVA is related to or driven by technology industries related to delivery of affordable broadband. That's an absolutely unbelievable figure. So the new news is that 6.3%, if translated into Joburg's economy at 313 billion, is 19.8 billion rand of additional GVA value, which otherwise wasn't there. So those are the economic figures, and I think those figures are unbelievable. But we're not seeing that. And we're not seeing that because I think there's very little affordable broadband that goes out to the non-middle class and the non-economically advantaged within Joburg specifically, but also at a macro level within the country. You know, it's funny. South Africa is a great country. We have exceptional people. From political space, we have a pantheon of greats. From a technology space, you all know the people here. Well, maybe not all of them. The guy on the top left, Siya Kluza, he's a guy that's been adopted by NASA. He basically owns a planet now. He's a rocket scientist. We all know Shuttleworth. IBM's guy called him the Linux guy. So he's no longer the Thought SSL sold his company for billions of rand guy. He's now Ubuntu Linux guy. We've got Vinnie Lingham on the right at the top, who migrated to Silicon Valley because he couldn't have the tools that he needed to start his startup here, and the market that he needed to develop that startup was not here. We've got Elon Musk, who started PayPal, also a migrant. Locally, we've got Stafford Macy, and I think we give him cool points for actually developing technology locally. He's the payment pebble guy, so that's something that's coming quite soon. And then from a slightly different area, bottom right corner, Ashley Bass, medical technology. So why am I talking about these guys? Because these guys are people from a previous generation, in most cases. We're not seeing the next level of innovation coming through. And that's because people are being left behind from a broadband economics perspective. If you want to use cloud technology, if you want to develop on Ruby on Rails, and you live in Soweto, can't do it. Before we started our broadband project to take the spatial infrastructure issue and move that out to underserviced areas, you could not access, this is in 2011, anything other than 2G in Orange Farm. And that's a sad statistic. So from an economic impact perspective, I want to talk about these 5 points. We know that broadband via Wi-Fi is a driver of growth. We know that it correlates in living standards. We know that it's a catalyst for job creation. We know that it modernizes economies in terms of using previously unseen technology. Andile mentioned software-defined networking, which is new. We also know that there's a consumer surplus when you have affordable broadband. So it's a good thing. And we all want it. And we all want it at an affordable level. But unfortunately, until now, it hasn't been delivered. And there's been a lot of talk in the media about government's role in delivering broadband and in delivering it to the public sector, okay, and delivering to the public. And everyone that I talk to says to me that government should do policy, government should do subsidization, government should not go into the infrastructure and broadband space in and of itself. And my question is why? The Honorable Minister who left us made some comments recently, which Andile picked up on. And he said that, you know, from a broadband affordable access and delivery perspective, there's a market failure in South Africa. And we believe that. So that's why we decided as Joburg to get into the broadband space, to build our own network, and to then offer that network on an open access basis to everybody. We over-engineered it to allow for that, and we built it to every suburb in the city. And as soon as we have gone live with it, I think we're going to see unbelievable things. Just from an interest perspective, the largest or one of the largest operators in the country runs 400 of its base stations on our network. So from a quality perspective, from a delivery perspective, I think that validates the model in terms of what the city's done. As I said earlier, from our perspective, these are the objectives, and I think this bottom one is the one that really, really resonates with government and with people in the everyday interactions that we have. We're in every suburb of the city, and that is a significant amount of coverage. It's a network which, as I said, is open access, which is ready for the private sector to take advantage of. And what we want to do is really move from a scenario on the left to a scenario where people on the right have the same access to affordable broadband that we all do. And I think that's a good thing. That's something that can be achieved, and that's what government needs to do to widen the pot of the GVA to ensure that we can all participate in it. This is an interesting slide. If you look at this slide, it talks about the access to internet via different mechanisms in every ward in Johannesburg. And the red and orange figures are representing the fact that in most wards in Johannesburg, representing about 80% of our population, there is very limited access to internet. And let's separate this from the device question, because we accept that smart devices are everywhere. But the ability to use those devices to get affordable broadband to the masses is not there. Because if you're living on a few R100, a week, do you really have 149, 150 bucks to go and spend on 1 gig of internet access? The answer is you probably don't. And this is the representative figure of what Joburg looks like from an internet access perspective. It's not a good story. This slide talks about what 1 gig of data and the cost of 1 gig of data. And I'm talking about mobile data now, not Wi-Fi, so let's just bear that in mind. But for what we spend on 1 gig of data, you could buy in Namibia 2,800 minutes, 2,800 SMSs, and 4 gigs of data. That is not representative of a smart world-class city, which is what Joburg strives to be. And so what we're saying is that we need to take proactive steps to get there, and we've started taking those steps, and we want to do it in partnership with the private sector, because we can't do it by ourselves. From an economic impact of what we've already seen, in putting down our fiber network, we created 2,500 jobs. We spent 112 million rand on manual trenching, and we chose manual trenching for a reason, not because we felt that we don't like machines. We did it because we thought that we could make a difference in people's lives, and I think we did that. And I'm going to close by showing you a couple of the pictures and just talking very quickly about our smart city platform, which is what we want to move forward with, because as I said, networks are high-tech plumbing. It's not about networks anymore. It's about what you can do with them. So we also recently launched a challenge fund. Check it out on www.hackjosiechallenge.co.za. And that's to foster innovation. That's to bring the new Vinnie Linghams and the new Stafford Macy's through, and that's to allow for fostering of innovation, new solutions, local solutions, which we can use and which we can proudly say, have been developed in Joburg. We've launched our free Wi-Fi, which Raj is watching with very beady eyes in terms of us delivering the best free Wi-Fi in the world. I think we're going to do that, whilst recognizing that free Wi-Fi is not free. Someone is always paying for it. So there are monetization strategies and multi-tenancy strategies which we're putting in place where we're saying, it's not about just us having 1,000 hotspots. It's about how do we open those hotspots up after you use, and Raj used the dreaded word, cap. After you reach your cap, how do we monetize those hotspots? How do we make access to that a reality? The chair of the forum spoke earlier about getting the supply side issue right, about getting a spaza shop to be a hotspot. And that's something that we are really passionate about and we want to work with industry with to get to that level where we can do that. We've spoken about MOOCs, we've spoken about the fact that we have a fiber network, we're doing stuff or looking at stuff in e-health. And I think what we want to say is that from a network delivery perspective, we've done that. It's now about digital democratization, getting an e-government platform, and really getting to success from a delivery perspective. Thank you.